Okay, the time is 6:35, and I'm going to call the work session of the mayor and council for the city of Snellville, Georgia for Monday, September 24th to order. Let's go over the regular meeting and public hearing, got communication, pledge, a couple of presentations. The police department is getting their state certification presented tonight. We've got a couple of reports with STAT and then Snellville Youth Commission.
Youth Commission is going to be Josiah Van.
Josiah Van.
VA.
Okay.
He has been elected our student mayor.
Awesome.
So, no Chris.
And then we have the two, I mean, they're kind of related, second readings from Century Communities. Anybody have questions or concerns for Jason on those to talk about during the work session?
Can you just give us a
Little brief overview?
Yeah,
Okay,
that
real
would
quick.
be helpful just to confirm.
You know,
I was reading through, I was
We,
reading through all the reports, it's a little
Most of
confusing.
the council members, I believe, were here last time for the adoption of the original senior development here in the city. I think it's like it was 130 lots at that time. I think now it's down to 110, but the plat is for 110. Well, at the same time, the piece next to it, there on the corner where the old brick house was being rezoned and developed. It was originally rezoned with the county to a different builder, it's called Pulte. They agreed to a set of conditions for substantially less lots, I believe 57, and one sits in the county and one sits in the city. Well, at that time, there was a different builder expected to do ours, and for that piece too, so Century bought that development basically, and began on it, got their preliminary plat. You can see it now, it's pretty much almost a final plat where they can start building houses. Well, during that time, they inquired about the newly zoned piece in the city, the 130 lots. So they picked that up, and then they designed it very close to what had been originally presented to council the first time. They actually reduced the lot count, but when we saw that was happening, we realized immediately there's going to be a service provision problem. You know, half the neighborhood was going to be Gwinnett County Police, half was going to be city, half was going to have county trash, half was going to have city trash, and it was going to get real messy. So we basically inquired, with the developer if they'd be interested in annexing in, since we were working with them on the other one. They agreed as far as the service provision, and they've just kept the process going with the county, so they haven't stopped any construction. So basically what you're gonna see tonight is they're requesting to bring their portion into the city that's in the county, 57 lots. There's a couple of variances associated. One has to do with the square footage of a very kind of small percentage plan that could fall under the minimum if a bedroom is not used, or an extra flex room is what they call it, is used as a bedroom, it causes a problem. It's not a real big issue. And then one of the conditions that were on both property was a certain percentage of masonry products on the building. And what they've presented is basically a ranging scale from 10 to 90% or to 100% based on what the buyer wants, as far as if they want just, the front side, and just offer some variation between, which is now going to be 110, 167 lots. So we've asked to have a range, and I've got some elevations to show you that shows the different percentages. And they're going to wrap the sides with a plotter table, a 24-inch that goes around with the same product. So it'll have masonry, and then typically you're dealing with your cement board, Hardy Plank brand name. For the rest, shakes and shingles, and that's two of the variances. And then the last one, there's actually one condition amendment too, where they've asked that in the original condition with the county, they required, and this is a condition you don't see often, and I've never seen it here in the city, is that they be required, that the HOA be required to take in money and perform maintenance on each individual home like it was a townhome community almost, that had combined walls. So And that was slated every 6 years, that the HOA would systematically repaint the homes every 6 years. And from what I understand, we just took that condition and rolled it into ours too to make them consistent. But after speaking with the builder after the planning commission, he basically said he understood it a different way, that it would actually be initiated by the HOA, but the homeowners would be required. But the way it was worded, that is not what it says.
Yeah, that's not the way it's,
Right, so, they submitted, and it's in your package, the rezoning condition amendment that basically asked that the language be changed, that, I'll just read it, the HOA shall be responsible for the exterior maintenance, residences at a minimum, painting the exteriors on a rotation not to exceed 6 years, so that's what, was the original condition. They just wanna have it, basically say that, you know, the HOA will have enforcement for the exterior upkeep instead of they will be responsible too. You know, they probably shouldn't be painting for way more than 6 years, honestly, with today's materials, and that cement board is, you're looking at 8 to 10 years, and then, we've never had that condition before, something you might find, I guess, maybe in Florida, some of the more densely populated, senior residents, but I don't have an issue with the HOA being responsible for the enforcement. We can also do enforcement, and their gripe is that it raises their HOA rates yearly, which, you know, brings them above their competitors and kind of prices people out when they're looking at raising it $100 a month to kind of meet that need of putting away for paint. So, you guys can, feel free to speak to the applicant on that as well.
Is that number 10? that you're
Yeah,
talking
condition
about?
number 10, so
Condition.
as it's written, I believe the ordinance addresses it. Hold on, number 10.
Shall be responsible for the exterior lawn and shrub maintenance and,
I think we changed it.
And shall enforce the painting of the building exteriors.
Does it say enforcement in the ordinance? I think that's the way.
Yes, it says enforce the painting of the building exteriors on a
So-
rotation not to exceed 6 years.
We changed it to reflect the amendment, because we felt like, you know, given the city's history to have never enforced anything like that. It was a
Where-
different subdivision guy.
where's the amendment in the packet again?
It's at the, like, the bottom. I got a couple extra copies if you want.
if you've got it in a written, you have a printed copy?
Yeah, this is right, though. This ordinance is based
The one
on
that's in
the
the-
applicant's request, which is to have the home, or the HOA be the enforcement arm and not the actual doing arm. They're gonna take care of everything else, the yards, the sidewalks, the common area, and, but not the actual painting of the structures, which, isn't the way they interpreted it originally. So, you know, Mitch Peavy's here, and he can talk to you guys a little bit about that in the meeting.
And it's to be a gated community.
Gated,
right?
private
So
streets,
they
private stormwater.
understand they
Right.
have to do street maintenance and, okay.
I mean, they have to have the gates, it's just
Okay.
something that all those, so we went over the design standards, the elevation, and then the square footage, so there was actually 2 variances only, and then 1 amendment to condition 10, request. So there'll be 2, there's actually gonna be 2 public hearings, there'll be 1 for the annexation, and then there'll be, upon the time of vote, there'll be an approval of the annexation, there'll be another vote for the approval of the land use plan amendment, and then there'll be another vote, for the rezoning and the conditions attached herein, which are, I'm gonna reference as what's in the ordinance. And then we'll just kind of segue in to the second case, which is just specifically the same 2 variances that they asked for in the first, range of masonry on the front, and then the square footage with the flex room. And when I show you that on the overhead, you'll understand kind of. And just a little further explanation, it's a smaller footprint on the bottom, the base package without the bonus room. There's 1 room labeled flex, and if they use that room as a bedroom, it's okay. But it doesn't meet the same definition if they use it as a flex space. And I'll let Mitch explain that a little bit more, but that's in your package
And a
as
flex
well.
space could be just like storage, or is that?
Yeah, when
the
they use,
idea?
when they say it's when it goes from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom house, the minimum square footage goes up. But it's the same house, but because it's been defined, minimums are set at, based on the square footages and the bedrooms. This is 1,400 minimum square foot. For a 2-bedroom, it's 1,600 square foot, let's just say, for example, for a 3-bedroom. So if it's just 2 bedrooms and an office, you're cool, but if you label that other space a bedroom, it brings you above, or below that threshold.
Oh, I
So
gotcha.
most of the time, they're adding bonus rooms and, suites for the grandparents and stuff, or the grandkids upstairs, and they're gonna be way over that minimum, but just in the, small percentage that it happens. That sounds kind of convoluted, it took me like 6 times to understand. But that's it, those are the 2 actions, are very closely related, and you can see they've already initiated construction, and we'll kind of get into it with just a little prefaces. We're not here to necessarily make whole-scale changes to what has already been approved. We're here to consider the request, because both of these developments have already been preliminary platted and approved and are under construction. So if we're too far away, maybe some, liability there.
Right, so but we approved, the part that was in the city, we approved for 130 lots.
Yeah, and it ended
And
up
they're
only being 110, so
110.
they actually reduced the lot count, made more open space.
Which is a really good thing,
I agree.
but that's not any kind of variance or anything that we have to,
No, because typically
as long as it's less.
less or substantially different, which it's very close, it's just less lots.
Okay. All right, and then on the first one, we do each one of these as a separate vote?
And it must be annexed first, then LUP, then the RZ.
You have
Is
the
that
public hearing on the zoning action
right?
first.
Okay. Public hearing on the zoning.
Then the first vote is on the LUP. And, I'm sorry. Then the first vote is on the annexation. You have public hearing, then annexation, then LUP, then the zoning action.
So alphabetical.
Excellent.
Just saying.
It works.
I thought, that's how I used to think of it, planning commission.
Oh, I thought that was from being a teacher.
Go that too.
Everybody practice your alphabet.
So sometimes it would be in a different order on the print.
Okay. Under new business, we have the bid for the stormwater drainage projects. Anyone have any questions?
Just the annual bid on 12 projects this time. Came in well under budget, but we usually discover some things underground that we don't realize are there, so
Did you have an emergency or
we have
two?
some room.
What was our total budget?
650,
And
and they
this
came
was-
in at 602, I think.
Okay.
So 1694.
Yeah.
Well, if next May we haven't had an emergency, we'll throw another project in.
We'll hope for that and not expect it.
You'll have Gay out riding on the jetpack truck.
And then we have a change order for the SPLOST to fund Tree Lane.
That's what we discussed the other day,
engineering.
kind of a housekeeping request from the county with some leftover money. There probably will be maybe $80,000 or $90,000 in engineering, so then we'll be able to go from there with the remainder, which will still be $1 million, and decide what we want to do with that money.
So we'll be able to use that for another project in the city.
Just work with the county on that.
Transportation, yeah. Correspondence,
No, ma'am.
city attorney's report?
We have one matter. I think Mr. Ross is ready to do a handout on proposed ordinance change that has to do with the subject matter of the legislature involving our right-of-ways. Mobility boxes and things. And this is just to put it on to give you something to look at. This has been percolating since The GMA originally gave us a recommendation to make an amendment to our right-of-way regulation stuff. And so we held it while the legislature decided what they were gonna do.
And believe it or not, we actually benefited from the legislative non-action.
Right. So, anything else we need to tell them about that?
So this is some, if you all can, read over this, if you have questions, just let Chuck know. And we'll plan to have this for a first read at our next meeting,
Sorry,
okay?
I stopped myself from crossing out the extra N,
I know. That's the first thing my eyes went to.
Catholic school.
-1.
I don't have my red pencil. Okay.
I do.
So that's it for the city attorney's report, and we need an executive session.
We do, yes.
All right. See if we have time. We might have to come back.
And basically, legislature can come by and pass something and pass it out the window.
Yes. And they can do that with anything that we do.
Well, yeah. But hopefully it'll slow them down.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so next we have Mr. William Camp, Phil Camp with Raymond James, to talk to us about bond financing.
How are y'all?
Good, how are
I know
you?
have a lot on your agenda, and Mr. Von Otteren asked me to put together a little presentation to y'all to give you a little tutorial on the bond process. And I'm new to some of you and familiar face to some of you. This city has one series of debt, and I'm partially to blame for that. We were involved with refinancing your city hall. So what the purpose of this little discussion tonight is to just explain the intergovernmental contract revenue bond, how you can utilize that tool via your DDA to do development within the city. And we've been talking about this for a long time. We were, in 2010, when I first started coming to meetings, and but I understand that some of you have been thinking about this for 20 years.
Yeah, it's
so,
been a while.
But anyway, good to be back with y'all. On page 2, and also, I'm sorry, Hunter Ewing, my coworker, is with me tonight, and he is a valuable asset and helped put this together, so I want to thank him up front. If you look at page 2, this is just a graphical representation of how you need to think about finance, how you need to think about borrowing money. You want to match those purposes with the different tools in your toolbox. So if you're going to own something for a long time, like a city hall, you'll finance it on a fixed rate basis over a long period of time and do that on a tax exempt basis because it's public use. On the other side of that, you may be acquiring a piece of land that will be used by a developer for a private use, and you might only need to hold on to that article, that parcel for a year or two. In that case, you'll be taxable because the intent is to turn around and sell it, maybe even at a profit. And because we want to pay it off quickly, you may decide to do a variable rate type of financing on that. So in a town center development, there's bound to be a mix of all these different parts. And so this is just a graph to kind of show you the kind of options that a DDA and a city can work together towards accomplishing. And real quick, the DDA, the Downtown Development Authority, it has the powers to do development within the city of Powder Springs. The city, I'm sorry, forgive me, Powder Springs is on my mind. We just did y'all forgive me. We did a park recently through their DDA. Snellville, forgive me. Snellville has that DDA power. You have that conduit issuer. You have a taxing authority. That is, you're able to levy taxes and pay contract payments over time. And that intergovernmental contract, that promise for y'all to pay and the DDA's ability to do these types of projects is a powerful force. The Intergovernmental Contracts Clause of the Georgia Constitution allows us to do this. Variable rate, looking at page 3. Whatever you do with a revenue bond in Georgia, we have to follow certain parameters. Bonds are validated in court. That's a good thing, protects you, protects bondholders. The judge blesses the financing. Whatever we do on a variable rate basis, keep in mind, we've got to put some parameters in there, a cap rate, not to exceed interest rate. Variable rate just means you can, the instrument resets periodically, the interest rate is determined periodically, you can pay it off rapidly, and the issue that we sometimes run into are lenders require a put, which is their option to cause you to pay it off early. Not really what you're, a lot of times, wanting to be involved with a budget that is fixed each year. If you have a put that comes back on you, we may have a road bump there. The reason people, on page 4, the reason folks look at variable rate bonds is historically it's the lowest interest rate money there is because it's resetting on the short end of the curve. And as you see, rates have begun to trend up here lately, but still very, very, very low rate. We watch SIFMA on tax exempt variable. On an average, we see it around 2%, and now it's about 1.5%. So we're not at the low mark, but we're pretty well below average. Page 5. Just so you know, I'm a fixed rate debt person because I like to know what my payments are going to be. And most of the time, especially for long-term financings, y'all want to know what do we need to put in the budget every year to pay debt service. Fixed rate bonds allow you to have a mechanism in place that acquires this item, whether it be a water sewer system, whether it be city hall, whether it be a parcel of land. You're acquiring this asset over time, fixed payments, easy to budget. There's no risk that rates are going to go up. There's no benefit for you, rates are never going to come down. You do have, generally speaking, a call option, the ability to prepay early. That way, if you come into a bunch of money, you can pay it off early. Or if rates cooperate, you can refinance. And that call is your right. It's not anything that the bondholder's forcing you to do. You have the right to pay your debt off early if you're able. DDAs, unless it's a constitutionally created DDA, like other cities have, some, like Powder Springs. Our DDA has a 3 mil limit, and that's okay. There's a limitation that annually the city can provide up to 3 mils for development, trade industry, and commerce in the city. And so whatever financing you think about, and combination of financings, remember that's our hard number we need to stay under. Make sure that our 3 mil limit is sufficient. And that's our job in working with your finance department. Page 6, tax exempt rates. It's a pretty good chart. You've got 1 to 30 years. The bars show you the high and lows. We've been tracking this for probably 24 years. There is a dark blue line, the top curve there. That's an average for the last 24 years. The gray line is where we were in November when corporate tax reform became a subject that everybody was aware was about to happen. So the law changed. Banks, insurance companies, etc., tax exempt bonds are worth a lot less to them because they're paying a lot less taxes. So, gosh, this calendar year, they've put $22 billion worth of tax exempt munis back into the marketplace. In other words, they don't own them, and they're selling what they're not making any new tax exempt purchases, I shouldn't say, in aggregate, they're not making big loans and they're divesting themselves of these bonds. So what is that, you know, we're seeing short-term rates especially come up. If you look at that red curve, that's where we are today. So short-term rates have been going up by action of the Fed, but also corporate tax rates. And so we expect, well, anybody that tells you they know what rates are gonna do is lying to you. Nobody really knows, but what we think is probably gonna happen is that red curve, the long end is gonna follow like the short end and come up. So rates have been climbing a little bit on the long end, and we anticipate that will continue. But still, we're below average for 24 years, and that's pretty good. Page 7. These numbers, especially an assumption of $10 million deposited to your projects account, are just pulled out of the air. This is for demonstration purposes only, okay? What we've done here is we're showing you interest rates, an average yield for 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, and what those interest rates and annual debt service and millage impact equates to. And y'all have other revenue sources available, but I'm always going to convey it in property taxes. But as you can see, and so the top box is tax exempt, the bottom box is taxable. In other words, public, like green space, city hall, these things are for the public's use. We finance them on a tax exempt basis. Things that involve public purpose, tax exempt, private purpose, taxable. And sometimes we have a building or some structure that has both. And so we need to finance part of it on a taxable basis and part of it on a tax exempt basis. Like I said, you've got a lot of moving parts, pretty grand scale undertaking, and so I do believe that there's a good likelihood some of your project is going to be financed on a taxable basis. Page 8. We care about the whole debt piece, all those different parts in aggregate. And so what this chart's demonstrating is, to the extent that you have to borrow something on a taxable basis, we keep it as short as possible, because short-term, lower rate. To the extent that we have longer-term debt, we can push that on the tax-exempt part. This is all meaning that in aggregate, we care about what you're levying every year, what your revenues are available to pay debt service. To the extent that you can, keep the taxable short, make the tax exempt long. Overall, your interest rate stays lower, your combined borrowing cost. This is just, the blue curve here shows you tax exempt AAA, and the red curve shows you treasury yields. In other words, there's a lot more difference on the short end than the long end right now. That's another reason to sort of expect rates to go up. Page 9. I briefly discussed validation earlier, and just validation is a good thing. It's a process we go through with our attorneys, helping us with the courts, blessing the financing. In other words, that we're within our 3 mills. We tell them a principal amount not to exceed, an interest rate not to exceed, and a time frame that we're going to pay it back. And those are reflected in a resolution adopted by your authority and your city council that are then, again, blessed by the court. And that's good. It's a requirement in Georgia. Not all states have it, but it's a very good thing for you, the issuer, and for the future investors and bondholders. Another question people ask often is, how long does it take? We can go very quickly, but I would just say that in the grand scheme of things, you want to let the project drive the train of when you borrow. But from the time y'all say hop, we can be working on a transaction and get it closed within about 2 months. So there's a little lead time there, but y'all are good planners, and y'all won't be waiting on us. When it's time, it's time. But the reason I say we let the projects drive the train is when you borrow long-term, even on a tax-exempt basis, we're not able to achieve a good thing, which is called arbitrage. That's where we give you money, you're able to put it into a short-term investment and make money, make a higher yield. So we always want you to be borrowing a little bit in advance of when you need it, but we don't want you to put money in the bank and sit on it for several months, 6 or 8 months, and not spend a dime, because it's not advantageous to you. You're paying out interest from the time that you borrow it. So you just want to match those things up. I went through that quickly because I know you have a lot on your plate tonight, but if anybody has any specific questions or general questions, I'm happy to try to help.
I just want to say that this conversation kind of dovetails with the one we had the other day at the work session. Bill knows we had a conversation with Blake and the team regarding the potential development agreement. And so a lot of the development agreement revolves around Bill's work. And we'll have to make sure that it's very well coordinated as far as timing, type of issue, what's public, what's private. But I think this is really good general information. It's good to know where the market is. And we've got several meetings coming up this week where we're going to get information that kind of ties down our budget a little bit more. So all of those things, budget, development agreement, bond issuance will dovetail together.
When we're talking about that 3 mil cap,
Yes, ma'am.
is that total revenues of the city, or is that just our property tax revenues?
Just the property tax.
Okay.
The intergovernmental contract, that promise to pay, you can fund that with any and all revenues that are available, but we're limited to how many mills that you can pledge and levy in a particular year. It's just 3 per year.
And that's why it tied back into part of the SPLOST budget. The 2017 SPLOST, about 71% of those revenues are in projects that are going towards the town center. So that's, somewhat a little over $2 million a year. So, it all plays into your
So we're gonna
your
borrow
financing
the
need.
money from the bonds and pay some of it back with the SPOS funds?
A lot of it, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
But that SPOS doesn't count as part of the mill, it's got to be.
That's over and above.
Based on the.
Yeah. So what, do you know what if we just look at what our 3 mil limit is on our property tax, how
That's
much that is?
$2.5 million.
Okay.
Yeah, we won't be anywhere near that. That's just
And that's just on the annual
That's
Yes.
right.
P and I amount.
Yes,
Can't
ma'am.
exceed the 3 mils.
That's right. In
Okay.
17, the mill brought in a little less than $790,000.
Okay,
And I bet 18's up from that.
yeah.
We just don't
We're up
have
at
it.
right,
840.
There you go.
okay.
And Bill, maybe you could just make a comment, you know, a few of the pieces of what we're doing,
Right.
kind of parse them into taxable and non-taxable, just so they have an idea.
The building where we're gonna have we contemplate having the market, as I recall, it's 3 floors.
So it's 2 different buildings now, the market building and then the library building with the 3rd floor.
So library, obviously, anybody can come in there and use it, it's public. That would be a long-term tax exempt financing. That would make a lot of sense for that. The market, depending on, the contracts for who's gonna rent the space, how that's gonna work out, that portion of that building would probably need to be done on a taxable basis. A good example, Sandy Springs, that's where I live. We helped them with their intergovernmental contract bond issue. We financed City Hall itself on a tax exempt basis, paying it off over a 30-year period of time. They too have a limitation, not only, their whole charter is limited to a certain amount of millage per year. But their Performing Arts Center is financed taxable. It would be taxable. So they used cash and debt for, their city hall project, town center. You'll have a very similar kind of mix.
Anybody have any other
Can
questions?
you do that on the same building? If you have one floor is public and the other is private, you can?
Yes, sir, yes, sir, you can.
Okay.
And we accountants just love all that proration.
I'm sure you do.
Percentages, buildings.
And we'll round up on the taxable because of that. You always want to give yourself a little bit of room on, if it's 37% taxable, we tell you, let's do 40.
40, yeah.
So I can
Okay.
Just to be safe.
Anybody have any other questions? Phil, thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
time. We appreciate you
Appreciate
being
it.
here. We will move along. Item B, the discussion of abatement of 2645 Governor's Walk. Who wants to talk about that?
I got it.
Listen.
So everybody familiar with the Governor's Walk neighborhood? Well, we had, about 7 or 8 years ago, we had some issues with some unconstructed homes that kind of got caught in the downturn. So we issued some abatement orders to either level out the structures that were unrepairable or have the owners complete them. So everybody complied except for this one here. So they did comply at that point in time by replacing the windows, removing the dangerous objects, which was basically an unfinished front porch, and that's about 8 years ago. So we had some complaints from the neighbors about the grass. I know this shows it cut, but it was just recently cut, and this is the state the house has been in for about 8 years now. So a little bit better than when we started, but still not complete. So, just need to figure out where we want to go with this, and Tony can kind of guide us on how to do it legally. I don't know when they'll ever want to complete the house. It kind of befuddles me that they've got money just sitting there and they're not doing anything with it. The interior of the home is not complete, but it's marginally complete, probably 40%. So we got some boarded up windows, that front porch that will show some deterioration, and unpainted soffits and fascia boards are about those are the 3 code violations I see. So.
The tool that we would use in this is a nuisance action, and so it would require the council finding that the conditions there are a nuisance. This one's a little bit unusual because we have a long history in our office on it with a lot of municipal court activity that we thought had gotten resolved. There was a prior nuisance action that ended up in a payoff, I think, on a transaction, and so that means somebody paid a lot of money to get possession and control of the property, and for them to leave it in that condition is a little bit, it doesn't make any sense. So I guess our recommendation is that this community deserves to have this property finished, and that we should do whatever is necessary to press the subject matter, both in the nuisance area and in the permitting area, to say, guys, what's wrong with this house? If it turns out that there's problems internally in the house that make it more expensive to fix it up than it will be worth when it's completed, then we can demolish the house. And in this case, this house was in so bad a shape originally in 2012 that we got an order to tear it down. And somebody came in and got a permit to fix it up. And they made a lot of, this is a lot better than it used to look like, but it's unimaginable that it hadn't been occupied and finished in that period of time. So tonight, the fastest thing you can do to resolve it is to carry it over to your agenda if you feel like this picture's designated as a nuisance action, and to approve moving forward with a complaint in your municipal court.
When was the last time anybody was inside?
Never.
So we don't
Oh,
know.
you mean the inspector?
Nobody's
or
lived
anything.
there.
So we don't know what the interior is like in terms
Well,
of
we
condition.
inspected it in 2012, I believe, and nothing's changed. They've done, the windows look new.
Yeah.
But that's it. There was nothing done in the original permit to address the interior because we were focused, mostly on the outside at that point. with
Right.
the
But we
expectation.
don't know when that was boarded up and how much water's gotten inside.
Well, you can tell they're going by it every now and then.
Okay.
But I mean, yeah, we wouldn't know. We
Who
have-
owns it now?
It went through several transactions and some liens, some of those super liens that were filed, and that's how the original owner came. Who knows who has it now? I mean, it's been a very weird deed history too. I've never seen anything kind of quite like it. Maybe that's why it's still sitting there, but, and there's houses on both sides completed. Everything's done in there except for that one, pretty much. And one other lot.
So if we vote on this to start the nuisance actions, what are the steps? What happens after that?
After that, we prepare a complaint. We just send a demand, prepare a complaint. It gets filed in your municipal court. It has to be served at the property, and there's certain steps that Jason walks through. Then we're on a court calendar. The court finds it's a nuisance. The power it gives us is we can go and fix it. We can remedy that situation and attach a lien to the property, and so it is the equivalent of a tax lien. So we have priority.
So what's everybody want to do?
Amend the agenda tonight
Mhm.
for under new business item C, nuisance action for the property address.
Okay, everybody good with that? You good with moving on with that, or?
Nah, we wouldn't know on that. Y'all can vote yes if you want.
Because you'd rather have it sit there and fall down?
You know, it's their property. They have no idea what's going on in there. You're assuming a lot. Some will vote no.
Okay.
Fall down.
And then, okay, so that would be item
C.
C under new business. So when we go to approve the agenda,
To amend,
make sure that whoever approves it makes that motion adds.
whoever's turn it is. I looked at a house in that neighborhood several years ago.
Okay. And then next we have the presentation for the correction of the minutes. Who wants to talk about that one?
That one's mine. That's the handout I gave you guys. I can't take credit for what is a really comprehensive review of a 17-month time period in the city where our records were a little confused. And so there were some minutes changes and some documents that were not in the record. And what your staff has done is gone back and watched every one of those meetings to make sure that these corrections are accurate. And so it's taken a while to get this, but the red markings are changes that needed to be made or documents that need to be added. I believe it's gotten composed into a corrected minute book already, so that if you wanted to see what those
Well, we're still working on.
actually look like,
typing up
you
the-
can get with Melissa and sort of see what they're doing in terms of getting the minute books back. But because they were approved and the minutes were approved and then they weren't composed correctly in the version that was in the folder, we're just asking you to give an instruction to the clerk that approves these changes and gets everything back in perfect condition.
And so these are resolutions, and we'll put them on the agenda for our next meeting.
Cool.
So that gives you a couple weeks to go through and
Good deal.
read through them. Okay, and then we have our ongoing projects.
We do have a need for a short executive session, so we'll move through these pretty quick. Town Center progress. I thought we had a great meeting last week. We'll continue to have those meetings and put all the pieces together. Bill and his folks are obviously an important part of the process, and we'll try to, before big decisions have to be made, we want to make sure everybody is comfortable. Market and library progress, I have a meeting tomorrow with the county committee to try to work out the library parking connections and go over a few other things with them. Marketing Snellville, you guys did the Purple Heart designation last time. We do have our city limit signs in. I think we have 3 going up in the next, hopefully in the next week or 2. So you'll start to see that. I've had some good comments about that designation. Town hall meetings, once again, don't have anything scheduled. Going to try to time those with major advances in the town center. The UDO work is progressing. We're going to coordinate, hopefully coordinate everything that happens with the UDO. We'll get a first draft of the comp plan and try to make sure the two are coordinated and make sense together. So they're going to be, progress on those two will be tied at the hip for a while. But the staff has done a lot of work. Caleb at TSW has done a lot of work on the UDO, so those discussions are still taking place. Roundabout construction, you can see that they finally have, I believe, all the utilities moved. We've got the lighting ordered, and progress should pick up a little bit at North and Fars. The county's still working on a bid and a schedule for North and Ridgedale. 78 and 124, the main thing there. We got a negative response from DOT as far as their commitment on the wall. We're still working on that. We might have to do something after the project's complete. We'll see. And just remember the October 8th lane closure eastbound on Clower at 124, and that will be 2 or 3 months while they work on that corner there. Yeah. Business and economic development. We are working to identify contractors on the build out of the upstairs city hall for to help that situation out. 2017 splost. Revenue is still going strong. Everything looks good there. We have expended some funds on a few small parts of the town center and transportation. Higher education outreach. Once again, everybody knows Gwinnett Tech classes are ongoing at Garage Works. Comp plan progress, as I said, the first draft is underway. It will be worked on jointly with the UDO. And ordinance development, we pushed the small cell ordinance out tonight. That has been, it's really been around for, a year. And everybody was waiting on the legislature, and so it is something to look at so we can get something on the books. SDS negotiations, really no progress to report there. And long-term planning, we're going to discuss internally how we can do a better job of engaging more and younger citizens. There was a proposal at one time, I think Mr. Witts was going to put a committee together, kind of a sounding board. We might need a 40 under 40 committee where we can engage younger folks in civic engagement. We'll talk about that.
Oh, we'll start with our
Well,
youth commission.
yeah, the area we're really lacking as far as youth advisory board, we've got the high school commitment. It is very, very tough to get college and new graduates from college because they're just, that's an issue in terms of pulling them into this community.
Yeah.
If we can maybe thinking about partnering with one of the colleges just for that purpose, to try and.
When we get our intern program going, that's one outreach possibility, but we've got to, we need more you know, citizens, younger citizens who are commuting to Atlanta who have, you know, all kinds of skill sets that we can put to
We've
use.
noticed it too. I've got some of the recent ones that are going to college,
Yeah,
but in college, and then they kind of fall off as they're trying to build their career.
yeah.
And
Well,
they're not coming back here.
we just need to
So it's
recruit those
something-
folks.
Yeah. We can borrow from other areas then first and try
Yeah.
to draw them in.
Well,
But that can be something that
but we're gonna talk more about
raise for
that.
youth commission as a challenge too.
Did you guys receive an email from High Hope Service Center?
Yes.
You did? Okay. Did you guys get one too?
Yeah, for the
Yes.
gala there.
Okay,
gala,
okay. Yeah, I
it's-
wasn't sure if it was.
Is there gala? Are they doing an
Yeah.
open house too?
It's
Oc-
right here.
October 13th, Saturday.
I just saw the
Norrisville.
gala thing.
Yeah, that's, I think we received that a couple.
Yeah, I
Couple
never
of
got
days
it.
ago.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I didn't get it.
He
You're
does
not
it
invited.
every year. Invite.
I
Barbara,
wasn't
you've
sure
gone
because it was
before.
like,
Not for High Hope,
No?
no. That's a, I mean, it's a charitable organization.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I remember
Good
seeing it.
organization.
Yeah.
it's a non-
Yeah, I mean, they do great work. They had an open house a year or two ago,
Yeah.
and Tom and I went and visited. I mean, they've got wonderful programs there.
It was
The
Harvest Moon Gala.
Yeah.
Or Gala.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I've never gone to the gala before.
I was just curious 'cause it was written in a way, so I didn't know if I was like, did everybody get this? Did I get
Yeah.
this?
Yeah,
Or
no,
this? I didn't know.
they usually try to include all the elected officials, I think. Yep.
Farm to table inspired dinner.
Sounds good.
We are at,
Executive session afterwards.
yeah, it's kind of late now, so are they okay? We'll just go ahead and adjourn the work session, head to our meeting, and we'll come back here for a short work session. I mean, exec session.
Right.